On this week's NESN Patriots podcast, we will recap training camp, the Patriots' first preseason game, and we will preview their upcoming matchup and joint practices against the Tennessee Titans. Hello and welcome to the NESN Patriots podcast. I'm Doug Kyde, joined as always by Zach Cox. Zach, we have not done this in too long. We have so much to discuss.
We have a whole lot. We basically have about a month of training camp, a couple joint practices, one preseason game. That's all to recap, and then we got to get into the Titans stuff coming up this week. So, yeah, very busy show here.
We really goofed. We probably should have done one of these or a couple of these. But we've been busy beavers
I think
we've training camp.
We've planned multiple podcasts.
Yes.
We've planned at least 4 podcasts. So we're just going to squeeze all that planning into one episode here.
And we promise that during the season and even at the end of the summer, because we've still got a couple more weeks left of that, these will be coming out more frequently. But as I said, we goofed. It's okay. You're listening now. All is well again. So I don't really even know where to start because we goofed so hard by not doing one of these earlier. But the Patriots' final open training camp practice at Gillette Stadium actually was today. So let's just start off, I guess, by giving our biggest takeaways from training camp, just a real overarching view at training camp. And mine, and I'm probably going to steal whatever would be your top one too, maybe, who knows, is just that Jakobi Meyers is a very good player, and right now I would slot him into a starting spot in the Patriots' starting offense, which is kind of unbelievable to say because he's an undrafted free agent. I think that, the last time we were talking to you guys, we were probably saying that Jakobi Meyers had the best chance out of any Patriots undrafted free agent to make the roster. Now, he's not a lock for the roster yet. Some things could still happen, but he might as well be.
He's as close as you can get.
Right. He's a near lock at the top of that near lock list. And he's running with a first team offense pretty frequently. And I'm getting too deep into the weeds here now, but N'Keal Harry is banged up, and the more time that N'Keal Harry loses to that injury, the more that Jakobi Meyers is just going to make up the ground over N'Keal Harry on that depth chart. So that's my biggest takeaway, just that Meyers looks really legit. He looked really legit in the preseason game, and yeah, he's probably going to be a starting wide receiver.
I agree. You were correct in the fact that that also would have been my biggest takeaway, and I agree with everything that you said. He's really been I don't know if we want to call him a surprise standout, because I think we all, or at least both of us, expected him to be in the mix. I think both of us expected him to actually make the roster before camp, but I did not expect the kind of rise that we've seen from him so far. The fact that he has been running with the first team for over a week now, the last 2.5 weeks. The fact that he did have such a good game in that preseason opener, and just how comfortable he looks in the offense. I really think that, obviously you can't read too much into these kind of preseason games and practice settings, but just from everything we've seen, it seems like he could be a legitimate contributor for this Patriots team. So since that's already taken, I'll go to my other biggest takeaway, is that we still have no idea who's going to be the Patriots' number 1 tight end to open this season.
Yes.
The kind of sense has been, since the beginning of camp, since really the spring, that it's probably going to be Matt LaCosse to start the year as that number 1 tight end, at least until Ben Watson comes back in week 5. And then Watson, kind of given his experience with Tom Brady and just NFL experience in general, probably going to slide back in that number 1 spot. But now, Matt LaCosse, a guy who I don't think either of us have been particularly impressed with since camp started. He's been fine, but now he's banged up. He suffered an injury in that preseason opener. Our buddy Jim McBride from the Globe reported that it was an ankle sprain. There's no real timetable for his return other than that he's not expected to practice this week or play against the Titans. And watching him go down on that play, it was a Jalen Reeves-Maybin, the linebacker, just kind of rolled up on his left leg, and he immediately went down and grabbed kind of midway down his shin, which you can't read too much into that anyway, but that suggests that it might be a high ankle sprain, which obviously takes a much significantly longer time to come back from than a kind of normal conventional ankle sprain. I think we had Danny Amendola had one of those a couple years ago, and he was out for 4, 5, 6 weeks. So if that's the case for Matt LaCosse, we might not see him until maybe a week or 2 or 3 into the regular season. And if he's not available, then you're going down that depth chart to a guy like Steven Anderson, who's also banged up and is really kind of a pass-catching specialist. And then some unproven guys in Ryan Izzo, Andrew Beck, who played mostly fullback in this game, and Eric Saubert, who they just picked up from the Falcons and who really doesn't have much pass-catching experience in the NFL. So, I mean, this was my number one question going into camp is who's going to be the Rob Gronkowski, just in the fact that who is going to be that number one tight end. And right now I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, Izzo will probably be the top blocker. He would probably play that Dwayne Allen role. Maybe, in obvious passing situations on 3rd and long, rather than having a guy like Steven Anderson or Eric Saubert or, Lance Kendricks or someone out there, maybe they just go with 2 running backs or 4 wide receivers or something to make up for that. Because I think that, I would probably rather have, looking at the wide receiver depth chart, N'Keal Harry if he's healthy, Jacoby Myers, Philip Dorsett, Julian Edelman if he gets healthy, even maybe Maurice Harris, over whoever that top pass-catching tight end is. I think that, if you're just forcing a tight end onto the field just because you think that you need a player at that position, I mean, if you're doing that with Steven Anderson is 6'2", 230-something anyway. I mean, N'Keal Harry...
He's basically the exact same size as N'Keal Harry.
Right. So, I mean, and he's probably going to be playing wide receiver anyway. He's probably not going to be, in line. You don't really need to match up Steven Anderson with a linebacker because you don't have to worry about his blocking. So, I think that, until Ben Watson comes back from his 4-game suspension, until Matt LaCosse gets healthy, Patriots might just have to be a little bit more creative with their offense and have, Sonny Michel and James White on the field at the same time, or have James White and Rex Burkhead on the field at the same time, or like I said, have 4 wide receivers and maybe keep extra players keep an extra wide receiver rather than keeping an extra tight end. Maybe you just go into the season, with Matt LaCosse and Ryan Izzo until Ben Watson comes back. And even if, LaCosse isn't healthy to start the season, yeah, you use an extra roster spot on an extra wide receiver, an extra offensive tackle or something like that to make up for it.
Yeah, we should say that Ryan Izzo did look very good as a run blocker and a pass blocker in that preseason game.
Also had a drop, though.
Also had a drop, yes. Pass catching, certainly not his forte, but if he is going to be used in that kind of Dwayne Allen role, I think that he would fit.
He's a good fit for it.
He's a good fit for that. For the Patriots. And we've seen a lot of 2 running back sets this summer. We saw a lot of or an unusually high amount of 4 wide receiver sets in this preseason game, trying to get all those different skill position players onto the field. And I agree with you. That's probably going to be their best bet moving forward.
And Michel's been catching the ball a lot this summer, too, which is something he didn't really do that much last season.
Absolutely. That's really been one of the kind of underrated storylines, I guess you would say, of this summer, that Sonny Michel, who was basically exclusively a running back, or exclusively a rusher, rather, last season, does seem to be expanding his skill set a little more, which just opens up a lot more possibilities of having him and Rex Burkhead, or him and James White, or James White and Rex Burkhead all on the field at the same time and being able to do some different things.
Let's tackle the offensive line next. You just let's get into quarterback a little bit, just because Jarrett Stidham was very good in the Patriots preseason game, and he's had a really strong training camp as well. I don't necessarily know what this means for the 2019 Patriots, for the quarterback situation. I don't know if Stidham's going to pass Brian Hoyer on the depth chart or anything, but I think that he's been good enough where you can maybe start to look at him as possibly being, the Jimmy Garoppolo type who could potentially take over for Tom Brady once Brady's done playing. And obviously there's been a lot of questions about Tom Brady since he's on the last year of his contract. He's selling his house. Alex Guerrero is selling his house, who co-owns the TB12 Center with Tom Brady. So there's a lot of questions about that quarterback position in general right now. But Stidham has been good enough where you can, maybe a few years down the line, they might not be in that bad of shape at quarterback if Stidham continues that progression.
Yeah, Stidham, I think every Patriots fan has to be very happy with where Jarrett Stidham is at this point in his career. I'm with you. I wouldn't say right now that he has kind of the leg up over Brian Hoyer. Right. If the season started today, if I'm the Patriots, I'm still keeping those 3 quarterbacks. But I could see a scenario where if Jarrett Stidham kind of continues this progression, where by the end of the preseason, the Patriots view it as kind of extraneous to have both of those guys on there. So I do think I can see a situation where I can see Jarrett Stidham beating out Brian Hoyer for that number 2 spot. And just overall, that I don't think that really matters as much right now. Just the fact that Jarrett Stidham seems to be ahead of where most Patriots quarterbacks are at this point in their career, especially even a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. I wasn't watching practice back in 2014 when he was a rookie, but you were, and you've said that Jarrett Stidham in practice looks significantly more comfortable and significantly better than Jimmy Garoppolo did back in 2014.
Yeah, I mean, even we've seen progress from Stidham even since the beginning of camp when he was really holding onto the ball way too long, and that's sped up quite a bit in the preseason game. He wasn't getting rid of the ball, as fast as Brian Hoyer or Tom Brady, but he was getting rid of it, fast enough where he wasn't getting hit very often. He was standing up in front of pressure. He was delivering deep balls. So, the preseason game really could not have gone much better for Jarrett Stidham. It really only could have gone better if his receivers had been better because, like I said, Ryan Izzo had a drop touchdown. Maurice Harris had a couple of, so-so drops.
There were
good throws.
3 passes that hit off his receiver's hands that would have been touchdowns. The 2 Maurice Harris ones probably could have been called pass interference, but regardless, Jarrett Stidham put those throws where he needed to put them.
Right, and obviously, I mean, just getting into that quarterback position a little bit more. Tom Brady's looked like himself this summer, and Brian Hoyer's had a decent camp. He had a very good preseason game. So, I mean, if he had struggled more in that preseason game, and obviously there's 3 more to go, or if he had a bad camp, I would say, then maybe we would be talking about Stidham, taking over that backup role. But Hoyer has also been solid. There's a lot of questions about the Patriots' left tackle situation because Isaiah Wynn basically sat out of the first 2.5 weeks of camp, or he was very limited.
He's been very slowly kind of moving his way up.
Right. On Monday, he actually started working in 11-on-11 drills and in 1-on-1 and 2-on-2 drills. So I think that this means he probably will be active and participating in those same drills in joint practices against the Titans on Wednesday and Thursday. And there's definitely a possibility that he actually returned to the field in Saturday's game against the Titans as well. When it hasn't been Wynn at left tackle, it's been Dan Skipper. I think we were all a little bit nervous to see how Skipper would play against the Lions in that preseason game, but he was pretty solid. It was against backups, so I don't know how he would hold up against starters, but I think the Patriots definitely have to hope that Wynn, who was a first-round pick in 2018, winds up winning and earning that starting job at left tackle.
Yeah, we've really had to kind of view this left tackle spot just as an incomplete for this entire offseason because the sentiment from everybody is that Isaiah Wynn is going to be the left tackle, or at least have every opportunity to be the left tackle whenever he ends up getting healthy. It now seems like he is very, very close to being at full strength, at full health. He started taking some one-on-ones after practice with some Patriots pass rushers in sort of individual settings while we were out in Detroit. And then, as you mentioned, he kind of continued that increased workload this week. Very interested to see how he looks against some actual live non-Patriots pass rushers down in Nashville, assuming he does end up participating in those drills, because this is a guy, I mean, he suffered his injury in the Patriots' second preseason game last year, which was August 16th, and it's now August 13th, so it's been almost a full calendar year, or almost a full year since he suffered that injury, and he hasn't had, this is going to be the first time he's going up against players that aren't his teammates. And even he didn't even go full speed against his own teammates until a couple days ago. So it's very interesting. Going to be very interesting to see how his kind of progression looks in practice, and then especially if he ends up getting into that game on Saturday. And Dan Skipper, he's been fine. I think none of us were all that impressed with what we saw from him on the practice field, but he held his own against the Lions backups in the game. He performed as well as you probably could have expected him to in that game. Again, not sure how that would go if he was facing some more talented defensive linemen there, but he's held down the fort. I mean, he's continuing to get first team reps there for the last really 2-3 weeks. So the Patriots at least like him enough, or at least want to see what they see from him enough to kind of keep him in that spot rather than bumping him out and having Joe Tooney go back over there, or Cedric Lang or Tyree St. Louis or one of these guys come in there.
Yeah, and I mean, Skipper he's 6'9", 6'10", 325, but he moves relatively well for that size. I think that was my concern, is that he wouldn't move very well, but he's been fine. So if it came down to it, I don't know if he would be the left tackle or if Joe Thuney would move over from left guard. But
I would be shocked if Dan Skipper is the Patriots' week one left tackle.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get into the defense now. Kind of an overarching look at that defensive front seven for the Patriots, because they're kind of realigning that right now. Basically since 2011, which was the NFL lockout year, the Patriots have been in mostly a four-man front. In that 2011 season, they really kind of tried to simplify everything because they had new guys like Andre Carter and Mark Anderson around, and that's why they moved to more of a 4-3 look. And then they basically stuck with it while Matt Patricia was the defensive coordinator, while Brian Flores was running things last year. They did start to get more and more complex as the years went on, and they were definitely throwing out some hybrid looks over the last couple of years under Patricia and Flores. But this season, we've really seen a pretty significant shift to a three-man front this season, and at least looking at the preseason game the Patriots played against the Lions, their base defense was a 3-4, pretty traditional 3-4. Their nickel defense was a 2-4, where they would have two defensive tackles and then those same four linebackers kind of surrounding them. And then their third down or passing situation look was more of a 1-4 or a 1-5, where they had one down lineman and basically 4 or 5 linebackers surrounding that player. So this is definitely very interesting. I think that it definitely puts way more of an emphasis on athletic edge rushers who not only will be tasked to rush the passer, but also drop back in coverage. And the Patriots do have a decent amount of those types of bodies on their roster. They brought back Jamie Collins. They've got Dante Hightower, who can play all over at linebacker. They've got Kyle Van Noy, who can play outside or inside. And then they've got more traditional pass rushers like Chase Winovich, the rookie, John Simon, Derek Rivers, and Shalik Calhoun, all of whom are more of those kind of outside linebacker types who might be able to kick, down to a defensive end in a four-man front, but they'll probably be standing up a lot more based on what the Patriots defense looks like this season.
Absolutely.
At least so far.
I thought it was very interesting that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they ran a single four-man front in this first preseason game.
And the only three-man front they ran in nickel was a 3-3, which sort of resembled a four-man front because Shalik Calhoun had his hand in the dirt, but it really wasn't. He was basically standing where he would have stood standing up at linebacker, but he just decided to put his hand in the ground. So, yeah.
It's been a very interesting shift, and this is kind of what we've seen since the start of training camp. This is really the defense that the Patriots kind of rolled out with on those first couple of days, and they've been really sticking with it. Now, maybe they kind of switch some things up. I'm sure they'll add some new wrinkles once the regular season starts, since most teams tend to be pretty vanilla in the preseason, not wanting to show off too much of their kind of game plan moving forward. But it's been very interesting to see the way it's affected guys like Derek Rivers and Shalik Calhoun, especially Derek Rivers, who didn't play at all standing up really in his first 2 years here, is now playing kind of an outside linebacker role. Same with Chase Winovich, who didn't do much of that at all at Michigan. And it's also a kind of another angle of this is that it might, if not squeeze guys off the roster, squeeze them out of significant playing time. I'm talking about a guy like Dietrich Wise, who really doesn't have that kind of, he's not a stand-up outside linebacker by any means, and he's not a kind of run-stuffing defensive tackle either. So it's kind of hard to find a way for guys like that to fit into this roster. And now Dietrich Wise is a guy who's been productive over the last couple of years, maybe not as much so last year as the Patriots were hoping in his second year, but he's a guy that you now have to look at whether he's on the roster bubble, because it just doesn't seem like there's an obvious fit for him.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely can't stand up at that outside role, and I think he would really have to prove this summer that he can be very stout against the run, at least if he is playing in that kind of three-man front at defensive end, and he did get pushed around a little bit in the preseason game against the Lions. Right now my computer is just kind of blowing up because Tom Brady just quote tweeted me. So
not a big deal.
Not a big deal at all. No, it's totally fine.
I would like to say we both tweeted basically the exact same thing, and I'm kind of salty that he's
that's rough.
Me.
That is rough.
It's very sad.
Yeah. The tweet is the Patriots currently are making rookies die for loose footballs while Tom Brady hoses them down. and Tom Brady quote tweeted it with, "I can explain." There was a little bit of rookie hazing going on there during the final training camp practice at Gillette Stadium.
Rookie coach hazing too.
Yeah, Gerard Mayo and Troy Brown.
Troy Brown dove through the slip and slide and then coached the rest of the practice barefoot, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah, that was wild. And even some of the older coaches who are first year on the staff, Bob Frazier also had to do it. So, yeah, fun stuff at the Patriots practice today. And I think that Chase Winovich, who we were just talking about, is probably hoping that that's the only hazing that happens and that he doesn't get his long blonde locks shaved or cut into some sort of terrible haircut that the Patriots sometimes like to do with their rookies. But while my computer blows up, let's get into the defensive backfield a little bit. And I think that probably the most interesting thing here is just talking about Duke Dawson, who was a second-round pick last season, who looks to be 7th on the cornerback depth chart behind Stephon Gilmore, Jason McCourty, Jonathan Jones, J.C. Jackson, Joejuan Williams, this year's second-round pick, and Keon Crossan. Crossan played really well in the preseason game. Duke Dawson was probably the worst Patriots player on the roster in that preseason game. So, if you were putting together a 53-man roster projection right now, you would have to have Duke Dawson off of it, which is pretty crazy since he was a second-round pick last year. But he also didn't play after spending half the season on injured reserve. Even after he came back, he actually did not find himself on the field. So I don't know, unless there's an injury somewhere else on this roster, you kind of have to look at Duke Dawson on the outside looking in.
Yeah, you sort of sorry, I lost my train of thought there looking at your Tom Brady tweets. But no, we sort of viewed it coming into camp as maybe a battle between John Jones and Duke Dawson for this slot corner spot. And it really didn't take that long for John Jones to just kind of come out and with his play say, no, this is my spot, I'm keeping this spot. He didn't even play in that first preseason game, which is usually a pretty good indication that the Patriots are kind of secure with where he is right there. There's always a chance that the Patriots could trade him before the season, and that would open up a spot. But at this point, it seems like John Jones will play a important and pivotal role on this Patriots team. And then you kind of shift down the list. You say, okay, maybe it's a Duke Dawson against Keon Crossan battle. As you mentioned, Keon Crossan was great in that preseason game. According to my charting, he has more pass breakups in training camp practice than any other Patriots player. He's obviously a very good special teamer as well. And overall, Duke Dawson just has not looked good. I mean, he didn't look good in the game against the Lions. He didn't look good in practice at all last week. He's had some moments here and there. He looked decent in the spring, and he's had a couple of flashes, a couple of pass breakups throughout training camp. But overall, it looks almost impossible to put him on the team over any of these other Patriots cornerbacks at the moment. And keeping 7 cornerbacks when you do have kind of some big question marks elsewhere on the roster at wide receiver and tight end and a few other spots, that just doesn't seem wise. So I don't know. Again, it is still relatively early. He does still have 3 more weeks to kind of state his case. But at this point, I agree. It's hard to imagine a way Duke Dawson's on the roster right now.
There are some other things. We kind of went through the whole roster there, but just looking at who's still on NFI and on the PUP list for the Patriots, we saw Nate Ebner return to practice this week. We saw Ken Webster return to practice this week. I personally didn't expect either one of those guys to come back this summer just because
things.
It would have been easier to put together a 53-man roster if those guys had sat out the first 6 weeks of the season. But what could further complicate matters is if rookie offensive tackle Yodny Just comes off NFI, and there's still over 2 weeks left for that to happen. If Cameron Meredith or if Demaryius Thomas comes off the PUP list as well, because that could really kind of reshift the whole wide receiver group. I don't know about the possibility of either one of those coming back. Personally, I would keep them on PUP to kind of have some roster insurance for week 7 if the Patriots do experience injuries or, ineffective play at the wide receiver position. But you could see, any of those guys coming back. Josh Gordon reportedly applied for reinstatement for the NFL. There's no real, there's no news on what's going to happen with that at this point, but that could further complicate matters as well. And then, if any of those wide receivers come back, if it's Gordon, Meredith, or Thomas, then we really have to look at this wide receiver picture completely differently, because right now the locks are Julian Edelman, who we do expect to come off NFI, and N'Keal Harry. I think that Philip Dorsett, since he's got so much experience in the offense, and Jacoby Myers are kind of in that near lock list, probably near the top of that near lock list. So that's 4 right there. And then you're kind of talking about a 5th player to join Matthew Slater as well, whether that's Braxton Berrios, whether that's Maurice Harris, whether that's Dontrell Inman. Gunnar Olszewski and Damone Patterson and Ryan Davis have much less chance of making the roster. But if Thomas or if Meredith came back, then you probably might have to start talking about Dorsett not making the team, or Maurice Harris not making the team, or just that whole picture. Braxton Berrios would probably be off. That whole picture would get kind of reset.
Yeah, the way it's kind of shaped out so far in training camp is that there's really been 2 tiers of wide receivers that have emerged. Really in the top tier, it's Philip Dorsett, Maurice Harris, Braxton Berrios, N'Keal Harry, Jacoby Myers. All of those guys have been targeted 20-plus times during 11-on-11 drills, all gotten extensive work with Tom Brady in that first-team offense. And then the second 5, the lower half, Ryan Davis, Gunnar Olszewski, Dontrell Inman, Damone Patterson, and now no longer Danny Etling. He was in that group. He was just waived today to make room for Eric Saubert, the new tight end. I have a hard time imagining any of those bottom guys jumping up into the top group, except for maybe maybe Dontrell Inman, after he kind of flashed a little bit in that preseason game and seems to be sort of climbing the depth chart a little bit. But even if you're just looking at those 5 players, once Julian Edelman comes back, I don't think you want to keep 6 wide receivers plus Matthew Slater on this roster. So you're really looking at, is that a Braxton Berrios or Maurice Harris situation? Is that a one of those 2 players or Philip Dorsett situation? Again, N'Keal Harry is obviously a lock as the first-round pick, and I can't see a way that Jacoby Myers isn't making this team after how well he's played this summer. So, but with those 5 guys, there's probably only room for 4 of them right now, unless Julian Edelman hits a setback or something and doesn't come back for the beginning of the season. But I like you said, I can't really imagine that happening. I'm expecting him to be back in time for week 1. So there's going to be some real kind of roster battles there between guys like Braxton Berrios, Maurice Harris, Philip Dorsett. It's going to be very competitive over the next couple weeks. So
we are about to head to Tennessee. We're actually heading to Tennessee tonight for joint practices, which will be on Wednesday and Thursday. It's probably going to be a pretty similar feel to the joint practices that we just saw with the Lions, just because there are so many familiar faces in Tennessee. We'll get to kind of reunite with Logan Ryan, Malcolm Butler, Mike Vrabel is their head coach. So it's definitely going to be another pretty good test, especially I think for the Patriots offense in these practices. I think the Titans defense should be pretty solid. They've got Jarrell Casey, who's a very good player up front. Like I mentioned, Butler, Kevin Byard in their secondary, Logan Ryan, Adoree Jackson. Offense, I think that the Patriots defense shouldn't have too tough of a time against guys like Marcus Mariota and Ryan Tannehill, but I mean, you never know. The Lions had a lot of success in joint practices before they got decimated by the Patriots in the actual preseason game.
Yeah, one guy I'm watching on that Titans offense is Adam Humphries, who had the whole kind of Patriots will he won't he sort of mini saga during free agency where he committed to the Titans, and then the Patriots kind of came over the top and tried to give him a more lucrative offer to convince him to sign here. Instead, he ended up saying no, honored his commitment to the Titans. He had a quote afterwards I believe it was to The Athletic, that said Tom Brady's age kind of played a factor into that decision. So that'll be interesting to see how he looks down there against some of these Patriots defensive backs. According to reports out of Tennessee, he's already having a very strong summer and a very good connection there with Marcus Mariota. But I'm with you. I want to see how these Patriots tight ends match up against these Titans defensive backs, because they do have a lot of talent in that secondary. Last year when the Patriots played the Titans, obviously game that did not go well for New England. Tom Brady had his lowest completion percentage of the season in that game, so it'll be very interesting to see how all those guys that I just mentioned who are fighting for roster spots, how they stack up against Logan Ryan, Adoree Jackson, Kevin Byard, all those guys.
So the former Patriots on this roster, I was just going through it. You've got Dion Lewis at running back, Cody Hollister at wide receiver. You've got Jamil Douglas on the offensive line.
I forgot about Jamil Douglas.
You've got Frank Heron on the defensive line. I don't think they've got a linebacker in here. And then Malcolm Butler and Logan Ryan in their secondary. So that's quite a few former Patriots on that roster. And it's funny because a lot of these other names on the team are guys that like people either thought the Patriots were going to sign or they had connections with or whatever it was. I mean, Logan Woodside, I think a lot of people were looking at him as a quarterback. Alex Barnes had a lot of the athletic fits the Patriots typically look for. At running back, A.J. Brown, I think a lot of Patriots fans wanted the Patriots to draft him. Adam Humphries, as you just mentioned, had a lot of interest from the Patriots. So it kind of goes right down the line of these guys who are kind of Patriots types were actually added to the Titans roster. And it makes sense since they do have Mike Vrabel as their head coach and John Robinson, a former Patriots scout, as their general manager.
Yeah, very similar situation to what we saw in Detroit last week with Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia.
Yeah.
A lot of Patriots brain trust at the top. Those teams do tend to kind of value the same types of players.
And even like Dane Cruikshank at safety, like there's name after name after name. Rashaan Evans, the Patriots reportedly were possibly interested in at linebacker, Harold Landry. So it really goes all down the list of those kind of Patriots types on that Titans roster. So certainly it will be fun to be in Tennessee to watch those practices. There's always a lot going on there. And I promise that we will be back sooner than we were this time. As I said like 15 times, we really goofed by not having at least one more podcast this summer. But I think that we recapped everything pretty well for you guys.
I agree. Yeah, we'll get back to you at some point before. Who's the third preseason game? Panthers.
Panthers, yes.
Panthers. So before the all-important dress rehearsal that we're gonna hear about a million times that week.
Yeah, I would say plan on maybe around this time next week we'll recap the Patriots-Titans game and kind of preview that Panthers game and also kind of recap everything that we saw at those joint practices as well, because there's definitely going to be a lot to watch, not only in the preseason game but also in those practices. So keep it on NESN.com for all of your Patriots news. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kide. Follow Zach on Twitter at Zach Cox Nesson. Like I said, keep it on NESN.com.